Hi and welcome. Today I have a mixed media tutorial for you and it's going to become a little bit messy. I'm starting out with our Marks number 1 stencil and I'm covering my both cards that I'm going to make completely with the texture. And I don't use texture paste. I'm using super heavy gesso from Liquitex. Just because when this dries, it dries a bit flatter than texture paste would do. And I would say also a little bit softer. And I don't want it to have super high, intense texture. I just wanted to have some background texture to work with. When everything is covered, I go in with that scraper again and I'm smoothing some of the texture out. So I don't have the texture completely onto my cards, just in some areas. And that also brings me some different textures. I have that flat gesso, the texture from the stencil, and I also have the watercolor paper, which is underneath. And the paper I'm using is a student grade watercolor cardboard from Gerstecker. This has to dry completely before you come on top with other mediums. I would recommend letting this dry overnight. Here are my cards. They are dry. And I start by adding some stamping to the background. This brings me even more texture and also a darker value. And I really like when there is something already going on a background. I feel that's a bit easier to work with then. The stamp I'm using here is from our Mixed Media Marks number 1 stamp set. It's available as a clear version. And it's one of my favorite stamp sets. I would say it's also one of our best sellers in the shop because it has so many different mixed media stamps and they are super versatile. The ticket stamp is also from that same set and I use it just partially in some areas to bring in a different texture. The ink pad I'm using is a StazOn black ink pad. And now comes the fun part that I personally like the most, adding in some color. And I'm picking acrylic inks. I'm using the Liquitex magenta and transparent burnt sienna. These are one of my favorite colors. They are super transparent and bright. If you don't have acrylic inks, you can work with watercolors. Just watercolors will not stay as vibrant as acrylic inks do, but it will work quite similar. With this mixed media kind of project, you always have a lot of drying times in between. So when I do this, I usually make more than just 2 cards. I have a bunch going on at the moment, and I can create whilst one card is drying. And I will post all my finished pieces over on our shop blog during the next weeks, so you can find them there. I will leave a link in the video description. With the acrylic inks, I'm adding in a lot of water and I try to let them do their own thing. So I let them flow, and I hope for a more organic and natural look. Um, and I really like how the inks run between the texture. I have added before. I think that gives a quite interesting texture on the background. I let the ink dry completely, and then I'm coming back with some black. And I wanted to add a bit more grunginess, so I decided to pick a liquid charcoal from Derwent. I really love the texture you get with it. I believe if you don't have this particular color, you can also use a usual charcoal stick and add something to your cards and then blend it with water. But that's not necessary. Of course, you can just work with black ink, or you can use a black water soluble pencil, for example. Just this charcoal creates a really interesting and different texture compared to the acrylic inks, and I really like how it runs between the marks on the cards. I try not to cover too much. I also try not to muddy down the bright inks I already have on the background. I just want to have that gray black color as a contrast and for some grunginess. As the charcoal itself is not that dark, I decided to bring in also some black acrylic ink to get some really black areas on my cards. And I'm just doing the same that I have done with the liquid charcoal. I'm moving it around with my wet brush, and I try not to cover too much of my cards. I'm just playing. I also add some splatters to my cards later because I feel splatters are always nice and make especially a mixed media piece more interesting. And again, I let everything dry completely. And here I'm going in with the white heavy gesso again. It's the one I've used in the beginning, and I'm applying it just slightly in a thin layer with my finger. I'm going over the texture from the stencil, and this highlights the texture. And it just adds a lot of grunginess to the cards. And I really like the contrast you get with that pure white on top. I have already searched for some focal images for my cards, and they have a lot of turquoise in it. And also, turquoise is quite an interesting complementary color against that orangey and pinkish background. And here I just scraped some turquoise green color from Amsterdam to my under paper, and I wanted to make some marks with it onto the cards. And therefore, I plan to use the backside of my brushes. I have two different ones here. One is a bit smaller, and the other one will be a bit bigger, and that makes really nice and interesting marks. Um, I think that's quite a nice idea. What you can do when you feel something is missing on your background or it's a bit boring, just add some little dots with the backside of your brush. I'm blending the rest of my turquoise color on my underpaper because these papers are perfect for collages in future projects. I really love to use them. And whilst I was doing, I thought maybe I can add a little bit of the turquoise with the same technique that I've used for the white gesso just before. And just to add a bit more turquoise with a different texture than these dots. And I really like that. Then I decided to dip in the cards into that layer of wet paint, which also gives a really interesting texture. And this is something I really have to keep in mind for future projects. It's such a simple technique, but it adds more interest to your work. I also wanted to add some white splatters with acrylic ink, and here you can see why I would not recommend buying the Schminke Academy acrylic inks. Almost every bottle now has lost its pipette into the bottle, and also the quality of the inks, well, not the white one, but the colored one, is not very good. They are not transparent, they are opaque, they have a lot of white pigment or filler in it, I feel. I would not buy those again. These are the worst inks I have ever used. Usually, I love Schminke paints. Their acrylic paints are wonderful. And I'm pretty sure their artist grade acrylic inks are wonderful too. I let the splatters dry, and here I'm back with some more stamping. I wanted to add some of that stitching look to the cards. I really love stitching borders combined with mixed media, but I'm always too lazy to pull out my sewing machine, and also with that thick materials on the paper, and also with that thick paper I've used, it's super hard to stitch on with a sewing machine, and just these stamps make it quite easy. These are also on that same stamp set that I've used before. I'm using both of the stitching borders. One I've used with an acrylic block to get a perfect image, and this one I'm using just loosely to get a little bit of that zigzag stitch to my cards. To finish up the tags, I want to adhere my focal images that you can see on the left top. And I wanted to have something for them to sit on, and I'm using some collage papers. Um, I just use smaller pieces and colors that are matching my background. I will now arrange everything. I will search for a sentiment that I have embossed in white to black cardstock, which is from our Mixed Sentiments #1, and then I will adhere everything to the cards. I will do this off camera because that might be quite boring, but I will share photos of the finished cards at the end of this video, and you will also find photos of the project over on my blog, which is linked in the video description. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I wish you a wonderful weekend. Bye!